Hello, friends. This is Douglas Auclair, known online as Joff. I'm the owner of the company Logical Graphs. And today we're going to be talking about solving some simple problems in Rust. In a prior video, I talked about installing Rust on your computer and dealt with issues that may arise when doing that. Today, building upon in the previous video where we built a Hello World program, we're going to be going to my resources where I have a list of quizzes, and we'll start knocking out a couple of those quizzes to get you your feet wet. All right, so let's get to it. First of all, you'll note that I'm a rather old-fashioned kind of programmer. So I just go to the terminal and use VI to code on there. If you use Emacs or if you use an integrated development environment in IDE, whatever you're comfortable with using, go ahead and use that. This is my preference, so this is what I do. So first of all, I set up a directory off my home directory, and I call it projects. So let's go to projects. And I have a Rust directory in there. Okay, and you see I have some example programs already set up. I'm going to ignore those for now. So first of all, do we have Rust? And yes, indeed we do. We have a sample Hello World program, so let's look at that. And that actually answers my first Rust question. Ooh. So let's get into that. So where are my Rust quizzes? If you go to my blog and you go to crypto, you see as the top resource is a Rust and crypto pop quizzes. So we go there and we say pop quiz number 1, hello world-ish. And it points to the book I'm currently writing. And Hello World is a sample program that is provided by Rust by Example. So a good recommendation is to start with Rust by Example and then just walk through each of these examples, compiling the programs, and then doing variations on the theme. So it says, okay, you have this program here. So let's step through it. Let's create a directory called hello off of my Rusty directory. Yep. And then so I just simply copy this program into my editor, VI. I'm going to call it Hello Rust. And then paste it in there. And then it says, okay, you create a binary by doing rust c hello.rust. We look in our directory and we have hello.rust, which is our program. So let's just look at that. And there it is. And you have something called hello. So let's execute hello. And it says hello world. Fantastic. All right, so binary can be generated using the Rust compiler rustc. Boom. rustc will produce hello binary, which can be executed. Boom, we executed. Click run above to CD, blah, 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 blah. Next, add a new line with the second print line macro so that the output shows hello world and I'm a Rust station. So let's do that. So we edit our hello world program and we have hello world and we want to add in this line. I'm a Rust station. Because I like seafood too. Let's compile that program and run it. Ta-da! Okay, our first program down. Fantastic. So I'd recommend that you go through this entire set so that you get a feel for writing a Rust program, compiling a Rust program, and then understanding the basics of Rust, types, modules, functions, flow of control. Cargo is a large part of Rust. Generics, and then macro rules. Traits are something that I use quite a bit. Macro rules. Now, Rust has something called programmable macros, which means that you can create a macro that operates on the syntax of the program that you've entered yourself, so that it not only does a text-to-text translation, but you can actually program the compiler to program your program to do something. Very, 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 very sweet functionality there. And a very powerful addition to the Rust programming language. Okay. Great. So let's go to my examples. So this is a link that we want to share in the YouTube that I'm producing now. So let's go to my examples. We go to crypto. We go to Rust and crypto pop quizzes. We go hello world-ish. We want to greet, and we want to greet the person to whom we're speaking with. So we want to greet somebody, and then we want to greet the person that we're talking with. Do I know how to do command line argument stuff in Rust? Maybe, maybe not. Let's get to work on that. So let's create a program called greet. Okay, first of all, we have the function main. And we know that because we did the last program, we studied it. And then we have command line arguments. I don't know what command line arguments are in Rust. How do I learn that? I just simply go and ask. I go to Stack Overflow, usually. Blah, 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 blah. And then it says standard environment args. And so it provides an example, standard environment. And we get args and we collect them. And it even includes a working example. So just let's snarf this right up. Okay, and we want to do something more than this. So if the argument length is greater than 1, we want to do something. But if the argument length is not greater than 1, we do what I asked to do, which is when I do a greet, I say whom. And we exit. Now we have the example where we want to accept multiple, an unknown number of inputs. So we have the set of args, so we just iterate over them. I happen to know the for loop syntax already, but if I didn't know the for loop syntax, then I would just go and look at control flow. And let's look for, is there a for here? There's loop while for in range. And so it says for n in 1 to 100, or that for in iterators, for name and names. Hey, that looks familiar. So I don't even know that you need the iterator here, but let's see if this works. Okay, so for name and args, and then I want to greet, and how do I want to greet? I look at the specification and I say, I want to say hello, comma, my name. So, or whomever. Let's try this out. Okay, the first one is should reply whom, and that works. And then let's greet myself. Ta-da! What is this? Oh, it's including the first argument, and the first argument is the name of the program. Well, I don't want to do that, right? So I want to slice the arguments. See, this is part of the learning experience. So let's look at greet Rust and greet.rust. We want to skip the first argument. Now there's different ways to slice this. So I'm just going to create a mutable variable. And that should do the desired behavior. What did I do here? So I created a variable called first, which was true. So when I hit the first name, first is true. So this statement, if not first, is false. So this is skipped. Then I assign false to first, go to the next name in the argument. And if so, first is false. So if not first is true, so I say hello, whomever is being greeted, and then continue on. So let's see what happens here. Okay, whom works. So we didn't break what was already working. And then we say hello, Joff. Great. Now let's say hello to both Mary and to Sue. Ta-da! That works as well. So that's our first Rust program. What did I learn? I learned how to accept command line arguments. I did a control flow where I said, if there's more than one argument, do the bulk of our program. And if there isn't, it's just a program name, then I want to know who I'm greeting. So I say whom. I also learned that the command line arguments includes the name of the program. I don't want to greet the name of the program. So I put in some additional control flow where I skip the first argument being iterated over. Okay, super. All right, so that solves our Hello World-ish Rust exercise. Done. Let's look at the answer here. You see here, I have standard environment. I collect the arguments. I split the arguments at 1 in this case. And if the arguments if the names are 0, I say whom. If the argument's length is anything other than 0, I iterate over the argument. So I took a different approach here in my solution, which shows that there's different ways to solve a problem. Cool beans. And then I go over each of the lines in my solution in great detail. So you can look at that and have a piece of cake. Let's go back and look at the next problem. It's summer. Not today. And so write a program that when you have no arguments, the answer is 0. And if you have a set of arguments, then you sum over those set of arguments. And if you run into an issue, you reply with an error. Okay, let's see how we do that. So we don't have a summer program, so let's create a directory. And let's create our program. Okay, we remember how to get the arguments, right? So we have to use standard environment. And I'm just going to include args in the import. How did we do that? Let's peek. Vective, I don't care what. Args collect. Okay, no biggie. I'm just going to leave string here, see what blows up in my face. Okay, so I split out the first argument. Okay, so now we need to convert our strings into numbers. So let's give that a try. I'm going to parse the numbers. And so how do I convert to numbers? I don't know. So how do I convert a string into numbers? Not into a number Rust. I'm not particularly married to int, but whatever. Okay, so we have that, and then we parse based upon I32. And then we unwrap it. And unwrap says, okay, I'm turning a result type into the basic type. And here's, I actually prefer this approach better, but I also want an error message that makes sense. So let's do the thing. So I'm going to iterate over the numbers. And then Let's say it's an F32. Boom. And then, well, I'm going to get a result type. Okay. So a result type is either an OK or an error. So if parse encounters an error, it's going to throw an error. If parse gets is able to parse the number, it gets the OK. But I don't know beforehand if it works or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to match the string parse to if it's OK, then I return N. But if it's not OK, then I'm going to panic at the disco. And that's the string. So panic is a macro that returns any type that's expected, but just simply stops the program. So Rust is a typeful programming language. So it's expecting an F32 here. And so if I'm able to parse an F32, then it returns that F32 value, F mean floating, into num. But if it's not an F32 type that's parsable, then panic returns an F32 type by quitting the program altogether. And we'll see how that works. But that's what's going on there. All right, so I've parsed my number into num. And now so I've accumulated my result into sum. And then what do I want to do? I want to print out this result here. So the set of numbers is nums, and then the sum is sum. And let's see if that works. Would it work? I don't know. That's what the compiler will tell us. Okay, we've got a problem. So what's the issue here? It's saying, oh, I'm not typing the args type correctly. So let's use the proper syntax there and say args is of type vector string. And let's see what that does. Okay, still got an issue. Okay, I meant to import args, not arg. So we need to change that. Boom, we've compiled the program. So let's go through our tests. No arguments, the sum of no arguments is 0. 1, 2, 3.14159. The sum of those numbers is that, and then 1 apple, 2 bananas. Okay, panicked. Apple is not a number. Boom. Piece of cake. So let's look at the solution that I provided. So in import standard environment, I collect the arguments. I split the arguments, all the same so far. Then I say nums is a set of vec32s where I iterate over a map by parsing, expecting n to owned isn't a number, collect sum f32 numbers iter sum. So I do a summation there. And so I don't use any mutable variables. I do a mapping over the array of arguments, parsing each, and then I collect those arguments. So I'm doing two loops here. This appears to me more complicated in its approach, but it doesn't use mutable variables. So again, two ways of doing things. And the sum of the array of numbers is that summation. Okay. Let's look at the next one. So we've knocked out 2 of the Rust pop quizzes. Boom, boom. So from what you've learned on Rust Pop Quiz 2, create a modules called utils.rust that exports 2 functions, getargs that gets the command line arguments, and getNums that returns the arguments as numbers. Then rewrite summer using getNums. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a library, and we're going to have summer use that library to write a simpler program as summer. Okay, so here we are in summer. And here's the program that we did write. Okay, so it has us collect the arguments, split the arguments at 1, return the arguments, and then return the arguments as strings, and then get the arguments as strings, parsing through each of the arguments and iterating over those, and then adding them if they're numbers and then failing if they're not. Let's write a library. So to have a library, I'd recommend using Cargo, which is a Rust's build tool. And so we're just going to have Cargo create a manifest file for us by doing a cargo init. And so we have cargo with summer. Let's see what the manifest file looks like. It says we have a program called summer. There's no dependencies. And the binary is called summer, and the path is to summer. So I should be able to just get rid of summer. So with my source code here, I should be able to build my project with cargo by doing a cargo build. Boom. So if we look now in a directory structure, we now have a folder called target. See, behold, we have a directory called target. And inside target, we have a directory called debug. So inside debug, we have the program summer. So to run the program, we can do cargo run, and it builds the program and then executes it. So we can do cargo run 1, 2, 3.14159. Does that. And then we can do run 1 apple, 2 bananas, and then pies. And it works as expected. So everything is the same, except we're now building our project with cargo. What does that give us? Well, we want to create a library. So let's create a library file. And the library file says that we have a module called utils. So that means we now have to create the module utils. Okay, and our module wants to have a public function called getArgs. We want to import the standard environment args library function, and then we simply use it. Boom, we get our args that way. So what's happening here? We, as before, we collect our args into a vector of strings or a vector of type that I don't care about. And then we split the args at the first argument so that the first argument we simply drop, and the second argument is a list of the rest of the arguments. And then we return the rest of the arguments. So we drop the program name and we return the arguments to the program, getArgs. Now what we want to, okay, so let's use getArgs. Well, how do we do that? Because it's in a separate file called utils that is imported and then exported by a file called lib. So we have to modify our manifest file and say we have a library Does this work? Let's give it a try. And now let's use that getArgs in our summer program. So we want to use getArgs. So we just simply say args is getArgs. We don't need to split that anymore. And then we have the args. And this is called args. So I'm not doing the get nums yet. I'm just testing out, I'm testing the waters by trying out getArgs first. And that's how I do program development. I have a set of problems. I tackle one problem. I solve that one problem. I make sure that solution works before I go deal with the next problem. So let's solve that problem. What happens when I try to build? It says, hey, you are trying to return something from getArgs, but getArgs as a function says that it's not returning anything. So let's correct the signature of getArgs to say that when I get the arguments, I am going to return a vector of strings and see if we can build from there. Okay. Expect string because blah, 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 blah. Try using conversion method to vec. Okay, no problem. So I like the error messages in Rust because they tell you what the error is, and they also suggest how to fix it. Their suggestions aren't always the best thing in the world, but let's see if this one works. Okay. So not found in the scope. So I need to fix my main program. and unused import in summer. So there's two issues in summer. Let's open up another terminal because I have multiple errors. I want to deal with all these errors as I get them. So let's go to programs, Rusty, and then summer. And so it says I have two issues. The first issue is I can't find the value of nums. So let's look at summer. And I see here that I'm trying to print out nums, but actually I'm trying to print out args. I'll try to print out nums later when I have that value. Okay, so that's the first issue. And then it says unused import standard environment args because I'm using that in the library, so I don't need to use it here. Okay, let's see if that fixes the issue. Borrowed or moved value args. Move occurs because args has type vector string, which does not implement copy trait. Args moved do this implicit call to iter, value borrowed. So we should do a reference. So the solution suggested has a lot of text here, but at the very end they said, why don't you just have a reference to that vector instead of actually doing a move by copying that vector over. So if we simply do this, does that make the error go away? Let's see. Boom, error goes away. And so if we do a cargo run on nothing, it says the sum of nothing is 0. 1, 2, 3.14159. And then 1 apple, 2 bananas, and 3.14159 pies. Hope you get the joke there. And if you don't, that's fine. Okay, and so that also works. Apple is not a number. So everything is working. What does everything is working mean? It means that I no longer have to write that code that gets the arguments from the system, collects them into a vector, splits out the first value, and returns the rest of the value. And that is now a library function. Let's look at that library function. That library function does the work for me. It collects the arguments into a vector, splits out the first argument, and returns the rest. So I no longer, for the rest of my life, have to write these or remember these two lines of code anymore. I simply call get args, and it gets me the arguments to my program. Done. First problem solved. But we also want a library function that gets the arguments as numbers. Well, we have a function that gets the arguments already, so I can create a library function that calls a library function. No big deal. But this time I'm returning a set of numbers. So first thing is so I get the arguments. Then I map over the arguments via iteration. Let's see if this works. It may not. So I have my vector of numbers. And I simply return it. Does that work? Let's see. When we go to build the program, get an error. Expects only one argument to it. So I want to say what is not parsing. And I want to say that clearly. So I'm going to format this argument and well, this formatting string and argument as a formatting string. Pass it in there. Let's see if this works. Boom. So, okay, now we have a function. The promise is that we have a function called getNums that returns a vector of numbers from the arguments. And I do iteration, I do mapping, and I do collection. All these things you can look up in the Rust, Rust in small pieces, or the Rust the Rust by example book that the Rust programming language folks published for us out of the kindness of their hearts. Okay, so I have this function called getNums. Now I want to use it. So let's modify summer to use this function called getNums. Instead of using getArgs, I'm just going to use getNums now. And my args are going to be get. So my nums. Now let's let's leave it as args. And I don't need to do anything now. Since I simply have numbers, all I have to do is this. And let's see if that does the magic. Well, see, I want to show the arguments. So let's actually get the arguments. And so now that I have the arguments as numbers, I iterate in sum. And let's see if that works. Okay, I have an issue. Type annotation needed, not a problem. So it needs to know what is the type that sum is going to return me. Let's say it's an F32. Boom. So the sum of the empty set is 0. That still works. Let's say 7 now because I'm a wild man. The sum of 1, 2, and 7 is 10. And you see that it automatically converts the arguments into floating point numbers. Boom. So it's an improvement on the previous program, but the program itself is already so much smaller because I'm using the library functions that I built. So let's throw a monkey in the wrench. And it says, monkeys is not a number. I suppose we're going to shock the monkey then. So boom, what did we do here? One, we used cargo to build a manifest file. We did cargo init that took the current directory's location and created, looking at the system, it created a manifest file for the program called Summer. Then we had the program called Summer. It built this manifest file. Then we added a library file pointing out that we have a set of utilities in the library, and pointed to the utilities file that we additionally added. So we modified the manifest file to include a library, the path to which was lib.rust. When we look at lib.rust, we see that it points to the utils file. So let's go to the utils file. Here it is. In the utils file, we import standard environment args. And with that, we created a public function called getArgs that returns a vector of strings that we collect the arguments, we split out the first argument, and then we return the rest of the arguments as a vector. We also have another public function called getNums that returns a vector of floating point numbers. It gets the arguments as a vector of floating point numbers. And how it does it is it gets the arguments, so it calls this function. It iterates over that vector, and then it maps this function here, which is given n, parse n, and expect that n to be a floating point number. And if it's not, return whatever that thing is not a number. And it collects that result into the vector of floating point numbers, returning that result. Then we go to Summer, and Summer becomes reductive now at this point, because all we have to do is import getNums, then we get the nums, and if there are any errors, getNums handles that. Now there's two ways to go about that. One is to cause the program to blow up if it's not what you expect. The other one is to return a result type so the caller can handle it as opposed to the one being called handling it. The caller handling it gives you, the caller to the library, more control over the flow of your program. But if you don't want that control, if you just want to quit, then this is the approach to take. All right, so we get the nums, and then we iterate over those numbers and sum them all into a floating point value. Then we just simply print out that result. Easy peasy. Okay, so that was an introduction to a simple Hello World program in Rust using Rust by example, which I highly recommend you go through all of those examples so you get your working knowledge of the basics of Rust. Then we modified Hello World to read arguments. We didn't know how to do that, so we went to look up that information. I usually go to Stack Overflow. It provided an answer. We copied that answer, and now we had get arguments. Then we built upon that by creating a program called Summer, which got the arguments, then parsed through the arguments, returning numerical values, which we summed, including some error handling that explained what the error was and where the error occurred by using a match functionality. And then we codified all that by creating a library function called getArgs, so we never have to write that code again. We just simply call our library function, and also created a library function called getNums, which used that getArgs library function to return all the arguments as numbers and internally managed the handling of parsing those strings into numbers and the error handling therein. So that's the basics of Rust. Rust, running programs, using cargo to build libraries, and some library functions. Thank you very much.